There's never been a more urgent need to recover our damaged ecosystems than now. Our soil is degrading, droughts are increasing, and more of our once fertile soil is turning into more desert. Central Mexico, in particular, here in Guanajuato, we're highly vulnerable to I practice this word, Paul? Desertification. Is that close? That's close. Due to such factors as deforestation, overgrazing, poor agricultural practices, and climate change. But if we integrate traditional knowledge with modern techniques, progress can be made toward restoring our degraded land, enhancing resilience to our climate change. Today, we've invited Paul Escott, CFO of Casa Agave, to tell us about their innovative approach to reversing desertification and restoring the soil. Okay, the system requires very little water and very low maintenance. And honest to goodness, I'm so happy to bring you here today, Paul, and tell us all about it. Will you welcome Paul Escott, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your invitation to come and speak to you a bit about what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish through our work. I don't know how I've never been in this room, and this is super cool, so it's gonna be really hard to just keep my thoughts going because I'm gonna be staring at the murals the whole time. I have to ask your pardon on 2 counts. Number 1, when John Palmer was helping me to revise the presentation, and his view was that there should be a much more local focus in terms of Guanajuato, what we're doing here and what's happening here. Although our view is that our work potentially has implications far beyond that, and that this is a semi-arid region like many others in the world, and therefore the work here can translate into other places, but we'll get into that in a little bit. And what Ron was saying in terms of things that you can do, we will shamelessly plug certain of our products to say that, you know, your consumer choices can really make a difference. So to the apologies that I owe you, when I was working with John to make this something that would be more of interest, he came to the conclusion that most people do, which is, gee, the brains behind the operation here are really your fair wife. So what if she came? So unfortunately, you're stuck with me. She's much more erudite about these things, and I will use 50 words when 2 will suffice. So you're stuck. But she is at Climate Week in New York and is addressing some body of the United Nations. So if you're going to get bumped, at least you got bumped for the best, and she's not going to get a coffee cup out of it. So I win. The second one is I have this morning a bit of distress of the lower abdominal tract. So if my stomach chimes in, I do beg your pardon. And if I start to look like I'm going into labor, you know why, and I'll just get through it. So moving right along. Whoops, there we go. Water. And my shameless plug here will be for Caminos de Agua. So we do a lot of work with Dylan, and he's been a great help. And these are figures that he gave us. So I think everybody sort of recognizes the unsubmerged church from the Presa. But these numbers sort of dramatize something, but it's really, this goes to ag and how much water is being pulled down. Now, there are other factors that we'll get into, but what he was really emphasizing to me is that, you know, extreme or severe loss is in centimeters per year. In Guanajuato, we're in meters per year, 1 to 3. And that is something where even under normal circumstances, I'm speculating a bit, but I think this is true, you couldn't pull down this much water and still replenish your aquifers, even if we had the normal amounts of precipitation that we had in years past. So this is a crisis. And as you alluded to, Ron, you know, you think taking a shorter shower and turning off the tap when you brush your teeth, I don't want to say go ahead and just waste, but there are some very powerful statistics in terms of these are where your consumption choices, hello, sir. make a difference. Yeah, may I introduce? Well, you know him, the one and only Lou Taro, yes, Rotarian extraordinaire and investor and brand ambassador and international bon vivant spokesperson for Casa Agave. That too. We'll plug Felicia too. This is going to be shameless plugs throughout. But I think it's a Big Mac. Takes something like 7,000 liters of water to produce. Now, that's not just because how much the cow consumes, it's the feed. And we will get into that in the next slide. So the equivalent is something like your showers for half a year. So to a certain extent in San Miguel, and you guys probably know a lot more about this because you're involved, but most people, they see all the developments around San Miguel and my God, and they're not doing rainwater catchment. And here, the real problem isn't that. As Ron was saying, it's the ag. We are a very, very ag heavy state. And particularly that ag goes to feed production for livestock. So it's a bit of apples and oranges. Yes, 85% of the water used in Guanajuato is for industrial agriculture. Now, I didn't want to fudge too much with what Dylan was giving me, but 60% of the tonnage that is produced for agriculture is alfalfa in the Laja watershed. I believe that is the largest in the state, but it's our local water source effectively, or our local watershed. That is all for animal feed. And as we'll get to in the next slide, it is water intensive, fertilizer intensive, pesticide intensive. So it goes beyond it's sucking up a lot of water. There are ramifications all over the place. Now, unfortunately, for better or for worse, this I didn't know. These last 2 points, ag doesn't pay for water. You get a water bill. The GM factory in Salau, they get a water bill. But if you're in ag, you have a water meter, but you don't get a bill for it. Now, ostensibly, you have an allocation in your water rights, but as you see, a fine of 17 centavos for every 1,000 cubic meters of water over that. And 10 water inspectors, whatever they're called, Conagua guys, running around a state with 15,000 registered wells. God knows how many unregistered ones there are. So there's very little incentive for ag in this state to do anything about its overuse because it's costless to them. So I've been told that, and basically these 10 guys are much more focused on the GM plant or whoever, where they're going to nickel and dime them, so to speak, in terms of making sure that, they're not a drop over, and if they're not, they get fined. And obviously you got to pay your water bill too. So I want to just jump around. Now, this is the one that's, just look at the title, and I think, sorry, this one's okay. There's another one that we're just going to we're going to pretend. But this is what I was alluding to. It's not just the drawdown of the water. There are knock-on effects. So the water pollution, well, all the lirio and the presa, there are varying theories, but let's just say a leading cause is the ag around the area where the runoff goes, the nitrogen fertilizer creates algae blooms, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not just the nitrogen, it's the chemicals that are going in there and so on. The pesticides and herbicides, what Ron was alluding to, this is also degrading the soil. The more they continue to farm this way, and the more pesticides and herbicides are put in, the poorer and poorer the soil gets. And typically that's when you say, oh, well, I've sort of ruined this, let's go ruin another field or cut down some trees and so on. And that goes to the deforestation. Ag, or livestock feed in particular, is one of the leading causes of deforestation in the world. Now, we don't have a whole lot to deforest in Guanajuato, but let's just say 400 years ago, it certainly was when they were cutting down all the trees for the cows or to use for the mines. But in the present, on a global basis, that's a big issue. So these are all sort of linked, the soil loss and degradation. Now, if we sort of jump back up, we're in a semi-arid region, so it's a lot more acute. And it's not just, well, we get less rain and climate change bites hard, but it's also what we have found with the work that we are doing at Cañada de la Virgen, just call it Cañada, is that that loss of ground cover and the associated trees reduces the humidity. The reduction in humidity then reduces actually the rainfall. So it becomes not a virtuous, but a vicious cycle in terms of the effects. Well, if you're up in Montana or you're in Canada, you don't really need to worry about that so much. But in a place like this, that makes a damn big difference. That goes to the ambient heat and the reduced rainfall, and then the desertification. That more comes from grazing. Yes, ag can cause it, but what we see in the communities around us is that, because there's less precipitation, and that means less grass, then you have two options. Well, you're either going to go buy alfalfa, which is water intensive, fertilizer intensive, everything we've talked about, and expensive, or you're just going to keep grazing and you're going to overgraze. So one of the ejidos next to us, Toriles, which you'll see a little later, is basically down to the bedrock. And it's from overgrazing, overgrazing, overgrazing. And this is a very delicate ecosystem. Once you get to that point, well, unless you're doing something like us, it's damn hard to get back. It's very hard to reverse that. So the point being, and to Ron's point, we're in a delicate situation here in terms of a tipping point of desertification. Now, I don't know how far or close we are from that, and I haven't heard from Dylan or anybody else that, we're 5 years away. You do hear on a global basis from the good and the great and those people who know about this stuff. And these are, ranchers and ag people. These, are not the ivory tower folks. That 2030 in their view is going to be when, the wheels come off. Now, we'll see, but it's just we are globally approaching I don't want to say a point of no return, but a tipping point in terms of water drawdown and desertification in particular. So we covered this. And then, well, what are the options? You can do nothing, and we can continue along our merry way and, hope that the wheels don't come off and everything's fine. You can reduce meat and dairy consumption, and that is not a bad way. And, I'll make my plug for our meat and why it's different. Or what we're trying to do is number 3, which is get smarter about livestock. Now, we're more on the feed side, but there are definitely issues related to climate change with regard to emissions and waste. And I guess feed and emissions, but waste is another big one. Now, this is, sort of take up some space, but I thought this is very interesting. I can't remember the source on this one, and it looks hazy to me, so you guys really aren't going to be able to read it. But the point is that big bar here, where we are today, whenever this was made, well, this is the carbon footprint globally. If we're going to avoid catastrophic climate change by 2050, well, it's got to come down to here. And if meat and dairy consumption continue as is, and this includes reductions in consumption of meat and dairy, generally are leveling off in Europe, the United States, and other developed countries. 81% of your available emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050 would be used by meat and dairy. And again, that goes to the feed production. So there's methane from the cattle, but again, we're doing stuff that will fix that. But the other side of it is also, again, the feed production, just to harp on it one last time. So, okay, well, who are we and what are we doing? This is the one where, distillates should be a pretty picture of a bottle. I, forget what slide I copied and didn't bother to put a picture on, but imagine a bottle of booze. So this really started from climate change. And in terms of a distillate, and we have 2 of them, they're agave spirits. They're probably the only ones in the world that really were born of climate change. So we really started to get into this about 5 years ago when you were really seeing a difference in the rainfall patterns. And everything I was talking about with less grass for the animals to eat, fewer crops, because most people where we are in the compost, small farmers are dependent upon precipitation for growing their corn, squash, the milpa, corn, squash, and beans together. And so were we. So what my astute and fair wife had the foresight and smarts to do was to start to look around, as she normally does, for traditional but somewhat forgotten practices that we might be able to take and apply with a bit of a modern eye. And the agave was what jumped out to her. What she found was there were small farmers in San Luis Potosí that were taking the agave leaves, which is generally regarded as kind of a weed. You know, you use the heart and you make agua miel all the way to tequila out of it, depending on what the species of agave is. But the leaves, you kind of throw them in the field and that's that. Back in the day, they would take it apart, take the fibers, make rope, make lassos, those beautiful woven belts that are now nylon. Well, that was all agave fiber. So it used to be used much more widely. It was also used for animal feed. So they would take it, chop it up, throw it out there. It has something called a saponin in it, which is an irritant. Well, what we found is if you ferment it, then the saponins are taken care of, and you've produced something of a kombucha for your cattle. So we take and I guess I should not get too ahead of myself, but the agave system then is how you plant this, because you can go out and plant agave, and yeah, it's better than just overgrazing or planting corn and throwing a lot of fertilizer on it. But there is a way that Sophia has developed to do this such that you are putting the groundwater back in. You are starting to restore the ecosystem health. You're bringing back these natural species of kind of starter plants, then all the way up to the hardwoods of the Spanish oak, the roble, and so on. And that's where it really makes a difference in terms of a place like this. We've talked about the forage. The feed supplement is the one that has the potential to go much farther. And I guess I should not get too ahead of myself. And then there are the distillates, which is, well, we're growing these agaves. We might as well do something with the hearts. And Lou can speak to that. And I don't know where the boys are. They should have been here with tea and cards for free cocktails and everything, but I'll plug all that later. But the distillates, it's not just about the consumption. Sophia was in Washington last week, I think, to receive a wildlife-friendly certificate for one of our agave distillates at Scene. It's the world's first to receive that certification. And that's important because wildlife-friendly certification goes beyond organic. And what we're talking about here, I do want to correct one thing. We don't believe in sustainability. Sustainability is sort of do no harm. Our view is we want to be regenerative, where what we're doing is making this better. We are trying to address these problems that are there, not just let's just not make this any worse. And so we are trying to create a virtuous cycle in terms of it's not you can't have livestock anymore. It's not, okay, guys, get rid of your cows and your sheep. I'll pay you $500 a year and you'll be a ranger to protect the robles. Well, how well is that going to work out? We have seen and we believe very much it has to be a commercially viable system and one that builds upon the existing, call them social, cultural, economic structures, telling people that have done cattle and sheep and milpa for 400 years, you can't do this anymore, and go be a forest ranger and I'm going to pay you 1/10 of what you're making. It's not going to work. So that's what this system is all about. And to go to the wildlife friendly, well, increasingly people are becoming aware that the tequila industry and the mezcal industry, more so, particularly in Oaxaca, cutting down these old growth forests, or when they say, wild harvested agaves, you're destroying pristine ecosystems by ripping these things up out of their natural habitat. The wildlife friendly is important because we are gaining traction there. And again, it's commercially accretive. This is not something where, oh crap, there goes my bottom line because the damn do-gooders came and I got to do all this stuff that I don't want to do anyway. This is commercially accretive. So the point is the tequila and the mezcal industries can be part of the solution. And a lot of it is just sort of cooking the trash. You're going to throw it out anyway. You can plant in a different way and so on. So that's why this is significant beyond just me plugging for you to come to our bar. So Cañada de la Virgen, well, this is where it all sort of happens. This is the laboratory and so on. So Sophia and her brother and their late mother before them had been at it for 25 years. And when she came to Cañada, it was pretty degraded and, pretty Wild West. So it's now considered probably the foremost pioneer of regenerative ag as it relates to ranching in the country. And there again, let's just say the healing, the regenerative nature of things is not just about the land and the water table. That's important, but it's also about the people. There are real products that are there that are very accretive to our collective health. And, that's important. So the meat is up there because this is different from what you're potentially buying at Costco. Get into that a little later. It's not terribly central, but so it's important to know a little bit about the agave. I believe in the colonial times it was referred to as the árbol de las maravillas, the tree of wonders, because of all the stuff it could do and you could do with it. Well, they weren't thinking the way we are now in terms of let's put the groundwater back and create habitats for lizards and other things. But it just goes to show how versatile the plant is. So I know this is a hard one to read, and I apologize. Just a lot of text on this. So the leaves, a typical, and we're talking about a Salmiana agave. That's what we use. These are big, rather hardy. Over its life, you get about 1 ton of biomass out of it, just in terms of the leaves. That's significant. That's a lot of feed for cattle, okay? And again, high in mineral, fiber, and water content. I mean, I don't know how much a 180-liter barrel, when we put it in there and ferment it, weighs, but it's a lot of water. So when you're facing a water shortage, this is great. Well, if we skip over here, where does it get it? From the night atmosphere. When we plant these things, we need to literally put about 1 liter on the new ones. We plant them when they're about 1 to 2 years old. That's it. That's all they need for propagation. Now, the agave system goes into some other things related to this, but no fertilizer, no pesticide or herbicide. We use fungal inoculants, which are totally natural, and they will boost this. So if there are chapulines, like we're having problems with this year, that takes care of it. You're not dousing these things with chemicals. Average life, 10 to 12 years. And really the point is, this is what jumpstarts everything else. This is kind of the starter thing. It will start to break up the compacted soil. It starts to collect the water and the dirt and so on. And you start to have the grasses return. Then you get these starter species like an ocotillo that starts to bring back some of the other trees, and eventually you're restoring the forests. Now, the heart, which is what you use to make tequila, mezcal, what have you, 200 to 400 pounds. They're massive. Now, we get a lower yield in terms of a liter of what we make. It's about 50 pounds, whereas if you were using a blue agave for tequila, I think it's like 12. But regardless, it's a biggie, and there's a lot in there, and there's more that you can do with it than just make alcohol. This is really interesting, the rhizomes or the hijuelos. These are these little guys that come out. It starts to effectively, out of the roots, reproduce itself. And you get anywhere from 20 to 60 per plant during its lifetime. So we've planted about 60,000 on, I want to say, 40 hectares. So that's all we need. Our plan is to cover about 1,100 hectares with about 1.1, 1.2 million plants. We got what we need because the growth then becomes exponential off of these rhizomes. Now, you got to take them out and replant them and so on, but that goes to the agave system, which we'll get to. So here it is. And we've covered part of this. And it becomes circular and regenerative and virtuous, and that you're making it better and better because you're restoring the soil, you're breaking it up, you're opening it up. The water is starting to get into there. That starts to bring back those species. That starts to bring back the forest. You're bringing back the shade, which you increasingly need for shade grazing for animals. You can sequester a lot of carbon dioxide there, which we'll get to in another section. That's starting to bring back the fauna, and those fauna oftentimes are the ones that are depositing the seeds and so on. So the symbol of one of our distillates is the puma, because we actually have footage of pumas at night, which effectively were thought to be gone from Guanajuato. By bringing back the ecosystem health, they are coming back, which is pretty cool. So agaves, let me just see, what do I have some? Okay, well, here's the case study. And I think this is probably the best way. So this is over by Toriles, and this is what I'm talking about. You can kind of, I guess this is a pointer? No, maybe that one. Oh, there we go. I mean, you're seeing the bedrock coming through here. So this has been entirely overgrazed. The soil is extremely compacted at this point, makes it much harder for water to be absorbed, not just run off and go down into the presa where it's going down to Celaya for, hey, industrial ag. So I think I've got the right one here. Okay, this is one of, which one is it? There. Okay, so planting on key line with berms. We actually take measurements and see, you want to sort of have not terraces, but level lines of these things, and you're using the berms, you're opening it up so that the water goes in there and it stays in there. And then what you wind up having are you start to get these starter species coming back in between. The fungal inoculants and so on also aid with that. So it's breaking up the soil, it's allowing it actually to absorb more carbon dioxide, but it's allowing the water to get in. So we're not saying, okay, effectively we're building little dams and we're going to keep it there. The water is still going to flow off, but you're allowing it to stay in place long enough that it is absorbing the soil, and you're breaking up the soil so that it's getting in there in the first place. So this is 1 year later. And then this is the same field 2 years later. So you see here, you see the difference. I mean, it's green. These are now 2 years old, but you see the grasses in there, and there are a few of these ocotillo up here, and these sort of starter plants, even little huizaches are starting to come back. And that's all from the agave. So it's not just the agave, it's what it can potentially do. Now, we have various versions of this. It's not, everybody doesn't want to bring the forest back, but we have talked to sugar producers where it's kind of like, my yields are way down. I can't put enough fertilizer on. Can you help me? So there are ways that you can do this, or parts of this system, such that you are restoring even the soil and the productivity of some of these degraded places that are used for industrial ag. Now, carbon dioxide reduction, we touched on this a little bit. These are the guys we were working with about 2 years ago. They came out, spent about 6 months at the farm, and they did a lot of measurements that sound fancy, and I don't know what they mean. Basal diameters and allometric equations and so on. Basically, what it all boiled down to was, if you plant agaves the way we do, not in a monoculture, 1,400 per hectare, and you allow, all this other stuff around it, over 10 years, you're going to sequester about 95 tons of carbon. In a semi-desert environment, that's significant. The late, great Ronnie Cummins did some calculations. I wouldn't hang my hat on them, but let's just say within an order of magnitude that, okay, if we planted the whole farm the way we're doing this, we could make San Miguel carbon neutral. That's not too bad. That's pretty impressive. The problem with this is, okay, you're doing it for 10 to 12 years. Okay, then, the plant flowers, it gets its quiote, and it dies. Well, you have to do something with the plant. Otherwise, all that carbon, at least in the plant, and here that 95 tons has nothing to do with soil or other species, just in the agave. They say that you're sequestering 4 times as much in the soil, but we didn't bother with those measurements. So you need to process the agave. And we talked to various carbon registries and carbon scientists, and the issue was that this is great, but it's only 10 to 12 years. And then you get into end of life issues. So if you feed the leaves to the cow, how much stays in the cow? How much does the cow poop out and it just goes back into the atmosphere that way? We make a mezcal or an agave distillate out of it. Well, how much of it stays in you? Then it gets very complicated. So the path to carbon credits there didn't make a whole lot of sense, but there's another way that actually is much more impactful that it does. But regardless, you're sequestering a lot of carbon with these things. So forage, we kind of touched on this. And this just sort of illustrates it. Here are the guys taking the leaves, grinding them up. They get fermented, and hey, they're happy cows. Now, you can't feed it 100%. Cattle is about 30% hogs, pigs, whatever you want to say, 50, sheep, goats, and chicken, 80%. But as chicken actually is the most popular or most consumed meat in the world, that's not bad. So this is more local though. So I'm trying to keep the focus local. You know, if you're talking about guys, go back to Toriles, we've got them using this. That's significant because getting guys like that and an ejido who, you know, will actually try something that you say when they see it works and stick with it, that's significant because they've got these things growing all over the place. So it's kind of the same thing for them. It's cook the trash. You know, don't go buy alfalfa. We've already gone through all the problems that creates, and it's expensive. So if you wanted to take it a little bit further, I would posit that this is probably going to be significant as if the climate continues to deteriorate here in terms of stopping mass migration or an emptying out of the countryside. Because, you know, this is maybe 20% the cost of alfalfa for, you know, the equivalent amount of biomass, and it's much more nutritious for your animals. So, you know, if you're a poor guy in the ejido, well, I guess you come into San Miguel and try to be a mesero or something, or you're going to head up north. So, you know, if you, this is, it's significant. The feed supplement. This one has the biggest potential impact. We take the same ground up agave leaves, dry those out, and we mix them with a series of mineral powders and other stuff. What we found based on our own herd is that the birth rate went up by about 12% and the mortality rate from illness went down by a third. Yeah. Now, this is anecdotal based on peer-reviewed research of other stuff with the same active ingredient. We expect an increase in milk production, but we're not dairy, of maybe 30%, which would be huge. Now, the other significant part in terms of greenhouse gas is that cattle are a significant producer of methane. Methane is 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. There, we anticipate we should be able to reduce the methane production in cows. And to be technical about it, they're cow burps, not cow farts, as many people think, by 30 to 50%. Now, this we're starting to get traction with because the forage, you're limited by the weight. So economically or environmentally, you know, the carbon that you're reducing, and I have some numbers that are ballpark. Sorry, we have 5 minutes? Oh gosh, all right, let's speed this up. Sorry. Well, in any case, the forage, that they're in these big heavy barrels. You can only take that about 75, 100 miles before the cost of transportation or the carbon dioxide footprint becomes bigger than what you're offsetting. The feed supplement, however, this can go everywhere, and we've been in discussions with major dairies in the United States about this, and their view is, can't do it on anecdotal evidence, I need clinical analysis, but if it does half of what you say, you know, I'll buy all you got. Here's the fun part. The distillates, hey, shameless. So Mata de Monte there with the Puma. Atzin is the one with wildlife friendly and so on. But again, okay. And I should say, eat, pray, love. These are healthy. And since we're running out of time, I'll go straight to the shameless pitch. Our office right across the street from Luna de Queso, we have it there. And you can buy a bottle of Mata de Monte for 500 pesos. And you bring us back the bottle and we refill it for 300. Now, for 300 pesos, and this is, you know, they're the awards, you're not going to get much better than that unless it's something that you better drink it before it eats through the glass. So, but again, these are additive-free, accelerant-free. They are organic. They're using our agaves and so on. So if you want to help our work, buy a bottle of Mata de Monte, please. Eat, Pray, Love. Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of the book, was down in Mexico City, and our PR guy was arranging something for her, and she decided that Mata de Monte in particular is the healthy alternative because it is free of accelerants, of additives, and so on. 96% of tequilas have additives in them, accelerants, because you can't wait 18 hours to ferment the damn agave. That's too much time, and then colors and flavors and so on. So, just point of reference that, the august Miss Gilbert felt that this was the stuff that she wanted to serve because it's healthy. And that generally is the perception of agave spirits. But when Sophia was up in Washington, a friend was saying, I love you, so I'll come to this thing and I'll drink some, but, I'm just not looking forward to the headache tomorrow. And it was kind of, try it, you're going to be fine, because it's clean, because it's low in methanol, because it's not loaded with chemicals. I'm not saying get a bottle and a straw and have a good Friday night, but you're going to be fine. So the extent to which this is an analgesic that's natural, happy juice, whatever, and when I had to deal with the accountants, I will definitely say it was happy juice, then this is an alternative, and it's your hometown product. Atzin is made by Herman Gonzalez, who is considered one of the 3 or 4 best tequileros in the world. His Tears of Llorona, which he sells in the United States, is anywhere from $350 to $500 a bottle. This is his sort of return to his roots in Guanajuato, and it's the rock bottom price of 3,000 pesos. This is more for the connoisseurs, but if you've had everything else and you're looking for something different, and you really can, this is what the experts tell me, taste the terroir of San Miguel in here. So it's not aged because it doesn't have to be. His view is that would take away from the flavor profile. And this is made with agaves from Cañada. So, sorry, wrong way. Teas and capsules, it's effectively, the same thing. These are healing. The agave actually loaded with fiber and minerals that you need. We're looking at this as actually a laxative of sorts for the United States, as there seems to be a rather large constipation problem, but agave is great for that. And it's going to sell for a hell of a lot more than a feed supplement. And scarily, there's far less regulation. So the cows are more taken care of than we are. But and the teas are also very healing. The Luna Azul, this has been called by, that authority of authorities, Miss Khloe Kardashian, the natural Ozempic. It's also great for cleaning out your kidneys and your liver and so on. So these, what we're doing also is healing for the people. We're taking these things that were kind of forgotten, jazzing them up with a few more flavors, but there's really good stuff out there, and it's important to preserve that. What am I doing? I'm not moving. Could you do this down? Oh, I have a pointer, but there we go. Distillates, teas, capsules. This sort of encapsulates it. We've talked about most of this. The heritage and dignity we touched upon, and I think that's important because we're allowing, this is the cradle of the cowboy, these vaqueros, this way of life. They want to stay here. They don't want to go work in the factory. They don't want to go become meseros in town, and they don't want to go north. Most of our guys do at one point or another, but they go for 3 years or so. They work some horrible job in a quarry, save their money, they come back, buy the truck, build the house, marry their sweetheart, and want to go back to being cowboys. But we're trying to preserve that, and your support preserves that too. Now, this is the interesting one to me. These are within an order of magnitude. However, they're compelling numbers. Return on investment. When I looked at what your agave cost would be for a standard dairy in the United States using USDA numbers, it's about a 500% return. If you plant agaves and you replace the alfalfa, at the current cost, USDA, that's compelling. Now, even if I'm off by 90%, it's still 50%. That's still well within private equity territory. That ain't bad. Water saving. This is a hectare of agave, same yield in terms of tonnage versus what you would use for alfalfa. So again, when we're talking about water consumption here, almost 32,000 cubic meters. That's a hell of a lot of water. Carbon sequestration, we covered. Carbon abatement, that goes to basically the carbon dioxide footprint of producing a hectare's worth, and I don't remember how many tons it is, of alfalfa. So again, apples to apples, it's 120 tons less carbon dioxide in the air if you're using agaves instead of alfalfa. And agaves are not restoring the ecosystem, the groundwater, they're making it worse. And the CH4 reduction, which is methane, we also touched upon. So there are larger implications here. It is a system that we believe is scalable. We have been invited to work with Texas A&M on the methane side. We've gotten a lot of interest, interestingly, from energy companies in the United States that lease millions of hectares, and their view is, wait a minute, you can restore all this crappy degraded land, I can graze cattle on it, I got a cash crop, and I've got carbon credits to take the stink off of my fracking reputation. Let's talk. Unfortunately, it's always like, after I do my next $10 billion deal, and then we'll talk. There goes another year. But the point is that, there is a growing consciousness, let's say, of this in odd quarters like the energy sector. But there it is. And what we're seeing, what we're hearing out of the United States as well, is that we are addressing real issues that real ranchers, dairies, and ag in the Southwest face. 40% of the livestock in the United States are in the Southwest. So again, these are things that can move the needle in a place like that, but definitely in a place here where, okay, yeah, time, I'm getting you're done. So there it is. Thank you very much. A pleasure. Now, do I step down or do you do questions, or we move to okay. But
So we can do one or two questions since this is a great presentation.
That's just the chemical symbol for methane. Just methane. Yeah. Question. What is the only version estimate for 1,400 per hectare? I would have to, I don't know that off the top of my head. I've got it somewhere in my computer. If you want, I could find it for you. As I recall, to plant enough for a standard dairy of 5,000 cattle, the investment would be about $5,000, and $500,000. And I think that was something like 350 hectares. So if you want to back into the arithmetic, I can't do it in my head. That's probably about it.
So I don't know how it happened, but just by coincidence, there's someone outside giving away free mezcal.
My apologies. I and the boys thought that you started at 10:30, so they thought that they were, an hour ahead of time. They have one of the teas, which is fantastic. So we sort of figured at 10:30 or 9:30 in the morning, starting your day with a nice pick-me-up was not how Rotarians normally begin the day. But we've got that. And what I'd also like to say is we have cards for our bar, and then Hanks has 2 for 1 with our agave distillate. And with our cards, bring them over at Soyano 18 and they'll give you a free margarita.
There you go. Fred, you got to wait until the meeting's over. Okay. Thank you very much. And your cup. We don't want you to forget your cup. Here's your cup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure.